This lecture has moved from the theological problem of free will versus determinism to the secular, on an intellectual journey through the centuries. When I began this lecture, I said it would not reach conclusions, but I think a few thoughts are in order after the material we have covered. So I will offer my conclusions, which are not prescriptive in the least. They are personal because in the absence of any real knowledge as yet concerning the workings of our brains, one is free to adopt any of the stances described tonight. However, my personal belief is that the secular thinker has no need to make a rigid choice between free will, often associated with religion, or determinism, too often associated with moral and ethical permissiveness. There is an apparent compatibility between the two stances. We have just begun to understand how the mind works in tandem with the brain. Colin McGinn points out that the, quote, science of the brain has not yet progressed beyond the most elementary descriptive stages. Until the time arrives when science will explain the workings of the brain more thoroughly, secular thinkers can be at ease with the concept that while the universe may be determined, the human brain has volition in the areas that matter, or as Dennett puts it, we have any freedom worth having. Thank you for your attention.
Very well done.
Questions? I hope I can answer them tonight, Nora.
You mentioned this term for the first time that I've heard it, atheologist?
Yeah, it's used, not often. In
What is
fact, I
What's an
haven't.
atheologist?
Atheologists are people like Michael Martin, atheist, atheist philosophers. And they seem to use it almost exclusively in the, the higher philosophic quarrels and what have you.
But
They
it's,
call themselves atheologists.
so it's not someone who is studying atheism.
Well, no, really, but it is people who are engaging in theological disputes with theologians.
So they're debaters, but
Well, I'd say they're philosophers, I would say
they're
they
a
are, yeah.
philosophy that leans in the atheistic.
That are atheists.
They are atheists.
Yeah, I would say
Atheologists.
hardcore atheists, yeah. I
Because-
don't think that atheologist would apply to anybody that wasn't a very serious and, a determined atheist arguing our position against formidable theologians.
Because theologist part of it sounds like it's a student of atheism.
Oh, okay. No, and it's
So,
not
yeah.
used very often. In fact, I don't even think I could find it in some dictionary definitions. But it is used by these men themselves, so,
Interesting.
yeah. I like it, to tell you the truth, so that's why I use it.
Is the problem of free will versus determinism, is a lot of this a problem of the definitions of these terms?
No, I don't think really. I think it's a question, it's like much deeper than that. It goes to the real issue of what are we as humans? How do we make decisions?
Because nobody, in the modern secular world is going to deny that there are rules and there are predictability about certain rules in the physical universe that are repeatable and that are predictable.
No.
Nobody argues that.
No, nobody
right?
argues that it's serious anymore, no.
So that in and of itself would exclude any discussion of free will, because you're saying, well, everything is predictable based on physical law.
But, we're part of the physical world, yes, but we also have, as Dennett says, we've evolved beyond a certain point. We certainly have, freed ourselves from perhaps not the instinct, say, for sex, but certainly haven't we, all of a sudden gained a variety of sex and things that animals don't have. They're very instinctual. How about eating?
Yeah.
Look at the varieties of eating that we do. We don't eat, like a normal animal. We're animals, and yet we don't even sleep like, normal animals. I think we've freed ourselves from some of the imperatives of instinct. I'm quite in line with Dennett in this.
But the determinists would say that's what happens with this generational determinism, is that one determinant leads to the next, which leads to the next, that it was all predictable and all governed by the inner workings, the mechanisms that are physical laws.
Yes, they do, but you notice they always punt. They always start saying, well, then, I do have intentions. And I can
Yeah.
act on those intentions. I
Right.
mean, so, they're denying free will and saying that everything is determined and everything up to that point. But I decided to, give this lecture tonight because I had that intent.
So what is an intention?
That's what I
What is
mean.
the definition of an intention?
That's what I mean. Their definition of intention is just under free will, really. It's something that you carry through on, even though everything has led up to my wanting to write this lecture and give this lecture and everything, I still have the intent to give this lecture.
Yes,
So, they're punting.
yes, I agree.
Yeah.
I'm just saying that
No,
that's
I
the
mean-
arguments that are thrown at me.
I know.
Is that they want to broaden the definition of determinism to include free will.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah, they
Thank
want to
you.
make it so big
Thank you.
that it would include everything.
Yeah, because it's intent.
Right.
I have intent and I carry through these intentions. Oh, okay.
So you
That's
see
not-
that's your
Yeah,
determinant.
I feel that, and I don't want to be insulting to anybody who genuinely embraces the idea of determinism, because as I said, these are all valid positions till we get, hard science, hard facts about how the brain works and what consciousness is, which we don't even begin to know that. Although, as I've said before in these discussions, some people think they've solved it. Well, hello, they have not solved consciousness yet. It's a huge area of discussion among major thinkers. And so, therefore, I don't know how we can, get around to the thing. I think that, okay, here's what I'm trying to say. I think that many secular people don't like the idea of free will, as I said in the lecture earlier, because they connect it with religion and this idea of the soul and the immortal soul. But as you can see from my lecture, and I wish that they would, go back and read a little theology or history or theological history, that predestination is also a big part of Christianity. And I think it's been kind of laid aside right now. There's, thinkers such as Plantinga, who are very major in Christian theology, embrace free will enormously, embrace it. So I think we've forgotten about that determinism of the many of the churches, especially the Protestant ones, and some of the Catholics, some of the early church fathers. So this is a huge argument going back, to the Greeks.
Now, just a short comment. It would be very interesting to hear their opinion on whether or not the free will is inherited through the genes, and that makes it determined.
That would be funny too.
Yeah.
That would be funny too.
That's a good argument.
AKA the evil gene.
Yeah,
right?
yeah, exactly, exactly. I don't think that, I don't think we can answer it, so that's why I feel most comfortable with compatibilists such as Dennett. I think, I don't know if they're right. I think we're gonna find out a lot more.
What does the role of intelligence, do you think, have in free will, and in what role does learning have in the role of free will? That is a less intelligent person, does he or she have less free will, or do they have the same amount of free will?
That's a good question. I don't know. I would be inclined to say less, but I don't want to stick my neck
Yeah.
out on that. How do you feel?
Are we just being discriminatory by we're saying if
That's what I
someone
mean.
has a lower IQ, then
That's what I
they're
mean.
more
That's the
governed
danger.
by
Yeah,
impulse?
Yeah, that's the danger
Yeah.
of moving in that direction.
Yeah.
And are we saying, are people saying, we evolve from the time we're born to a higher and higher state?
Not
of
always.
awareness. But, however, is that necessarily true?
Yeah, it doesn't, no.
Doesn't matter. It doesn't matter sometimes because people don't change from the time they're 10 years old until they're 90.
Or they deteriorate.
Or, worse yet, they deteriorate, yeah.
And likewise, I'm thinking of the Freudians and psychoanalysis, because, Freud said that we're governed by drives, that
Right.
we have these drives that lead to neuroses, this is deterministic.
Yes,
The family in which we are born, the gender in which we are, even the genitals that we have, it's all determines our neuroses or lack of neuroses, and that only, you know, by psychoanalysis can we get out of it. But he was both deterministic and a free will person,
yeah.
but in the first 5 years, he says it's all laid out for us. Would you agree with that, or is that?
Well, I agree to a certain point, yeah, I think that we are somewhat determined, obviously, our gender, you know, how people they say even how people toss little girls in the air, it's not the hardy way that they toss little boys, you're already being treated differently as a little baby in arms, but your family, but how do some people, I mean, then we don't make any account for the differences. You have somebody that's raised in a very similar environment that's able somehow to break free of that environment to some extent. I think we always carry the damage or the good.
Mhm.
But why do some people, you know, change, and why do others stay? I mean, say you have an alcoholic father, let's say. Well, some people, you know, adopt, embrace that alcoholism, and they say they can't help it. The next person doesn't. What's determined, and what is choice?
Within the same family, within the
And
siblings.
yeah, that's a good point,
Yeah.
and within the same
Siblings.
family. I don't know, is this determined?
And even more alarming, twins.
How does that happen?
Yes,
Yeah.
twins. The psychologist, of course, would say it was probably had to do with birth order and et cetera, and how
Oh,
the
by 10
parents
seconds?
reacted. Yeah, well, I mean, no, but, well, twins, yeah, but I mean, no, they would say that the older child or the younger child or whatever,
Mhm.
they always have an answer.
Yeah.
But, you know, I can come up with an answer for everything too, you know, when I don't wanna say I don't know.
But, you know, as an atheist who does believe in some free will, what is my defense against the other atheists who might say, well, you're an atheist, you have to believe in determinism?
Well, I think that my lecture has made some telling points. I mean, there are atheists who don't believe in this, and I think it's a silly position.
Because it's not a settled argument.
Exactly. So you know, honestly, you want my honest opinion? No, don't start throwing tomatoes at me, people, but, you know, I feel it's ignorant,
Yeah,
uncalled for,
yeah,
and arrogant.
yeah.
I could say more, but I think I've said it all at this point.
Yeah. Okay, well, good.
I mean, how can they tell you that you have to be this or that because you're an atheist? Atheism is not a philosophy.
Sounds awfully familiar, you have to be this or that because you're a Christian.
Yeah, because you're a Catholic or a Hindu or whatever.
Who needs it?
I don't think that should be part of being an atheist.
That you have to do this.
I think that, yeah, making imperatives like that, making imperative stands is just ignorant.
Except for the very obvious thing, that you do not believe in a theocracy, you do not believe in a theist.
Or in a God, yeah, you're not a
position.
theist, yeah.
Isn't it desirable, though, to strive towards predictability so that we can control or plan for the outcomes of certain things, rather than saying we don't know what the outcome is? Wouldn't it be much better to lean in the direction of determinism so that we can plan for things?
Yeah, it would be a great idea, but you're still going to be faced with an enormous amount of chance, chaos. I mean, one of my lectures, I don't know if I've read it yet, but I mean, just look at the chance, no, I haven't read it yet, it's coming up, the devil and the rise of the church, rise and fall of the church and the devil at the same time. That the weather made a big difference. Just weather in exactly what happened in the witchcraft persecutions. And at the same time, around the same era, the Spanish Armada, which was going to invade England, and certainly the English were not prepared to turn that back, suffered an enormous damage from bad weather, a terrible storm. And their huge fleet, this huge fleet which was going to invade England and take it over, and it would have, was suddenly decimated. Now, how do you plan for that? The Spanish planned for everything.
Well, we were just talking about human behavior. I realize that there's other forces of nature outside of the humans that would change things, like being killed in an earthquake. Obviously, that's not because of human nature, that's because of nature. So, but I'm speaking of predictability as saying, planning how many prison beds do we need 20 years from now?
Okay,
How would
yeah.
we predict that? We would say, well, people are gonna commit crimes because we know that's what they do,
Right.
Deterministic. So from the pragmatic argument to me would favor determinism, not free will. If you're running a society, you'd want to have a certain amount of determinism.
I agree, like we
Yeah.
know that
Yeah.
eventually the supply of oil is gonna wear down.
Mhm.
Plus, we have an enormous amount of problem with the countries that control a lot of the oil. So predictably, we should plan to reduce our dependence on oil.
Yeah, but again, you're giving arguments towards things that are outside the human mind.
Yeah, right. Yeah,
So I'm speaking only of what we
Well,
would say
certain-
about human
yeah.
nature.
Inside the human mind, certainly, and go back to the prison beds,
Yeah.
immediately we have to think about the political influence of that, because it has
Jim's right.
become a matter of bringing income into certain communities that have been struck by the economic turndowns
Yeah.
over a long period of time. They knew that things were going away, the small towns were fading. We've got to stop this, we've got to have some work here. Oh, let's bring in a prison. So they bring in a prison, they have all kinds of inmates, and all of a sudden, they're finding people that have to go to jail. And
that's part of
consequently,
the
the United
problem.
States of America has the largest incarceration rate in the world.
Yeah.
I mean, that's insane, isn't it?
Larger than
So-
Russia? Larger than China?
But, so, and now, of course, with economic conditions swinging the other way, they're trying to close a lot of these prisons because nobody can afford them anymore, and they don't care about these little communities. So therefore, they're releasing people that are not likely to commit violent crimes, who probably shouldn't have been incarcerated in the first place. A lot of them are up on minor drug things. It's just so silly. So how can you predict how many Jim's right, it's the societal imperatives that are kind of
Yeah.
determining how many prison beds we're going to need. Economic imperatives, cultural imperatives. We also, I think, a British social scientist, I can't remember his name, he considers, one of the reasons that he considers us like a kind of a failed society here in the US is that we're tending to solve social problems by incarceration. So we're just putting people away for X number of years and saying, well, we got them
Took
out
care
of
of
the way
that.
now. But now we can't afford it, so we're letting them out. Now
And
it's
another
going to happen.
horrible
Are we gonna
outgrowth.
need those prison beds in 20 years?
Another horrible outgrowth of that is it's slave labor.
Yeah, that's another
They are
problem.
used for actually slave labor.
Yeah,
Oh, what do you mean it's slave labor? They get paid, 25 cents an hour,
yeah, that's true too,
50 cents an hour.
I'd like to ask you about existentialism. How was that philosophical framework informed by this debate, say, prior to Sartre and then after Sartre in our modern times? How does it and how did it affect existentialism?
Well, I think that had they known these experiments and what we know now about the brain, I don't think that they would have been as firm on, the free will and the choice that they would have. I don't think that they would have abandoned it. But Sartre was always willing, in the face of evidence, at some point to change his mind. So even he said, some of the socialist thinkers that he associated with, especially later in his later years, that finally he got it through his head that some washerwoman in some really restrictive society, I mean, how much choice did this person have? If they're XXXXX, did she have this much choice? He came around to the point of view that really the choice was not much of a choice for people like that.
But that's the economic choice.
Right, well, it's not just economic, it's gender, it's cultural, it's this and that, and he did come around to that. So he altered his view in that all we humans have a choice. It's a very Western idea, and I like it, I embrace existentialism. But I just think that, they also weren't aware of the workings of the mind as well, and I think that they would have mitigated their opinions somewhat. Don't you? I mean, I can't imagine them.
No, but he was talking about prisoners in prison who worse off than the washerwoman, that they too had choices, so I
Sure.
don't think that it came down to just economics for Sartre. He wasn't talking about the poor, he was talking about the mind, the freedom of the mind.
Yeah, but, this woman wouldn't have even been, he's just using this theoretical woman,
Yeah.
wouldn't have even been educated enough to know enough about, that she could make up her mind. He understood that finally. I think we Americans think too much. I can remember having a discussion once in a reading group, which started to really, make me angry, seriously. Well, because, we were talking about people in, some of these countries where there's just no choice. I mean, they're stuck in some outback thing or something. And these people that had been in psychoanalysis, by the way, were like saying, people make choices. Well, yeah, people that are Western and educated and they have the means to travel, sure,
Freedom
they
of
make
movement.
choices. These people don't even have freedom of movement. Where are they to go?
Well, but again, it's not economics, this is about what you decide to do with what is happening to you, what you mentally construct as a result of what is happening, not so much how you move to another country to get better off, but what does it mean, to be a thinking being? How can you think differently about, what choices can you make about your thinking?
Norm, I honestly believe that you have to have a certain level of income and education to really make choices in a significant way. There's exceptions, I
Yeah.
know. I know there's exceptions,
But-
but in general, I think so. I think existentialism is great for, people in the West like us. I'm not sure if it's like good for that person that's going to be chopped up in little pieces in Somalia tomorrow or someplace and can't get away. So they could face their death, I suppose, courageously, as Sartre would say.
Well, yeah, I'm not saying that, I don't want to debate about existentialism, so we'll go.
Well, I embrace it, so,
But-
I'm an existentialist.
But it's not about economic choice. I don't think he was talking about he was talking about how you
Well, the mind.
make choices in your head.
Well, how does this woman that's in this like horrible condition, how does she even like begin to start to think that she can make choices?
Because she's free.
Well, because, he realized though that
But then that favors the deterministic
Yeah.
point of view, is
Yeah.
that we are our experiences. That is what is done to us by society is who we are.
yeah,
What
But
we're
I-
moving toward with our discussion
Yeah.
is that the more educated you are, you're moving into different levels
I think so,
of
yeah.
awareness.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah, and I want to stick to our topic tonight.
No, I think that this is excellent. I think it is part of our topic. It's part of this like centuries-old argument about free will and determinism, and how much are we determined and how much are we free, and how much are we determined by our education, by our income, etc., and how much are we free because of that. And I think that we get back to Dennis again. The more evolved we become, even mentally, the more free we are.
But the neuroscientists would say, wouldn't they say we are determined because there's this brain mechanism that produces a mind, and if you had this enormous computer, you could calculate every step of the
Not
way.
all neuroscientists. There's Ramachandran, who's really good, and he's an atheist too, or an agnostic. I think he's an atheist. He says that we have free won't.
We have free won't,
Yeah.
what we won't do.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
that makes all the difference. Are you gonna act on that urge or not? I don't think that all neuroscientists are in that, are in
Okay.
that mode of thinking
It-
about it's deterministic.
But is that their aspiration then, as neuroscientists, that someday they're going to get to that point? Is that?
Well, I think that's the aspiration of everybody, determinist or free will or compatibilist. I think everybody would like to know the truth.
But the free will people have already also made a conclusion that
Yeah.
they're not going to find it in the mechanism
Right.
of the brain. the
Well, I don't think
synapses.
Colin McGinn is that much of actually is a free will person, because he has talked about this issue and other things that I've read. And I can remember, he said it's a moot point whether humans do have free will in a determined universe. So I think he's probably taking a we don't know and we might never know stand. That's usually Colin McGinn. You know, I suppose that's why I like him so much, because, you know, he withholds these great pronouncements, you know, even though he's a very brilliant man, you know. He's saying, we don't know. We're at the very beginning of the description of the brain. He's reminding us, because a lot of these people are talking like, you know, now we know, like, you know, what this lights up, this part of the brain lights up and that part, and we don't know what this means
I
even.
agree, yes.
You know, and I think what he's trying to say, we're at the baby steps. We're at the beginning. Let's not get ahead of ourselves and solve things.
You're on the right track, because what has been discovered is that area of the brain lights up. Oh my gosh, we found out what's, you know,
Yeah.
what area of the brain is. And then 2 weeks later or 3 months later, they're running a different experiment.
Yeah.
Same area of the brain
Yeah.
lights up. Whoops.
Yeah.
Oh my, I think we have to rethink this.
Now, even with like religious experiences, when they've tested nuns and this and that, when they've done extensive tests, they found out a whole bunch of different parts of the brain are working when they're reporting having some kind of religious experience. So what does this mean? Nobody knows.
And,
And by the way, the religious point to it is, you see, it's like embedded in the brain. And the secular, the atheist says, you know, look, you can see it's all brain action and, you know, nothing real outside. And we're back right where we were before, with the two sides, you know, sure that they're correct.
this was the ghost in the machine, isn't that what they
Yeah.
called it? That there was some sort of thing running in your
Right.
mind.
Arthur Kessler wrote that, yeah.
Can you say a little bit about behaviorism and
Oh, dear.
Skinnerian thinking?
Well, I think Skinner didn't give much credence at all to the free will idea. I mean, I think he believed that, you know, it's all very materialistic. There's this very materialistic brain, and that you can condition people to like good or, you know, bad behavior.
So that he went further than just determinism, though. He wanted to actually program people
Sure,
Yes,
or reprogram.
sure.
yes.
Yeah, he thought it would make a better society.
So do the neuroscientists have anything to say about him today?
Well, I don't
As far
think
as
that
the
they, I
class-
don't, you know, from what I've read in the topic, they don't discuss him very much, but as you know, in psychology, the ideas, you know, modified and what have you, are very much used today for certain things, in business, in the classroom. So maybe they're good in a limited way. I mean, you know, if it works for people, I don't see anything wrong with it.
Because if we're determined, then it implies that the mechanism can be manipulated
Yes.
to give another outcome.
Oh, yes, yeah.
But if we have free will, then there's less opportunity maybe for that mechanism to be manipulated.
You're right about that,
There's
yeah.
less of a mechanism.
Yeah. I cannot get rid of the idea of the fact that we have some, you know, margin of choice or non-choice, whatever, you know. I can't get rid of it, and I find that, you know, Dennett very sensibly discusses, you know, how this might have happened.
And do you feel that he was a leader, or was he just summarizing what he had already gathered from others?
You know, he scattered a lot from others, but I think that this idea of his is pretty, you know, I don't want to say totally original, but I think it's well thought out, and I think he brought together a lot of facets of thinking and came up with a fairly, you know, original or certainly cogent idea. Yeah, I think he's a leader in this. And let me add that he's one of the few atheists that is, you know, made some kind of significant contribution to the discussion of determinism and free will, that is respectably accepted by other respectable thinkers. You know, we are sadly lacking, we atheists are sadly lacking in a tempered view of this topic. And there's, you know, I hate to use a cliche, but there's a lot more heat generated than light.
Yes.
And I'm going to admit, before I studied this area thoroughly, I contributed to that heat. And when I started studying it thoroughly, I realized how ignorant those arguments were.
Mhm.
And what a waste of time they were, really. Because we
they're-
were all talking about something that we didn't know anything about.
Okay.
And it was really
Yeah.
getting down to, blah, 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 it's, we're determined, and oh, no, we're not, and, we have free will. And there was nothing about any of these thinkers who are major thinkers. And I've just touched, that's the tip of the iceberg. That's why I recommend to everyone really strongly Sean Nichols' course in the great courses on
Mhm.
determinism and free will, because you won't find anybody that's more even-handed.
Is that available as pure audio?
I believe so. I think so. I can't remember because I got the DVD.
As a rule, they
They
issue
usually
both.
just have the audio, yeah.
Okay, good. And I want to follow up with your last comment, is I think that the debate about free will versus determinism is just as important as the topic itself.
Yeah, when it's informed by some reading and serious thinking.
Well, I mean, even if it's not, you can learn a lot about what people want to believe, what people are motivated by. This idea of determinism, that we must have an explanation in our lifetime, or that we must have a feeling of freedom, and libertarianism now, I think, biases the debate, right?
Yeah.
So that the objectivity is lost.
Strongly.
And so those people who want a conclusion right now, I think are, as you said, it's not really leading to the real truth of the matter.
No, and actually Will James and
Yeah.
other philosophers, not so long ago really, but it's long ago now, but in the 1920s and 30s, they found, and they were pretty good thinkers like William James, they found compatibility ideas on the will, kind of cowardly, kind of a middle of the road, wishy-washy position. They found it lacking in moral courage. So there's that point of view too. I don't really see why it would have to be that way. I think people like Dennett are just trying to create some kind of a bridge till we know for sure. I mean, believe me, if it's determined that we are determined,
Yeah.
okay, I'll throw in the towel and I'll say okay. Or if it's determined that we have free will, I'll say great. It's whatever there is.
This comes up in the art, culture, everything. The debate arises. The psychoanalysts would say, where the artist is just neurotic and they're trying to work out their neuroses. The sculptor is actually just has a desire to play with his feces.
I know, but that's silly.
Yeah, I mean, but they try to reduce it to that level of determinism. And I'm also thinking of the old TV show The Prisoner.
Yes, that
where
was
it says,
terrific.
I'm not a number, I'm
Yeah.
a free man.
Yeah,
See?
exactly.
So the debate carries through every part of our culture. Thinking of the movie A Clockwork Orange.
Yes.
It's the same thing.
Yeah,
where
exactly.
there was this reprogramming that they tried to do to make him violently ill whenever he had feelings of violence.
Right,
See?
I remember that,
So
yeah.
that was carrying out this debate of, well, can we change people, or are they predetermined as well? And the priest there in the movie argues for his free will, that
Yeah.
you can't reprogramming him, he must be free to choose. But Sam Harris, I'm also thinking of his book, The Moral Landscape, where basically he says that scientifically we should be able to figure out what is moral and prove it.
I know, but you notice that he certainly hasn't come up with anything.
But there's this fantasy that if you just have this enormous supercomputer, you would be able to figure it all out.
It's a beautiful fantasy, and, I hope he's right. But I think, I just think that point of view, and I'm not just attacking Harris, because I'm a nasty person or something. I think that point of view lacks maturity.
Yes, it does.
Yeah, I mean, I think that as thinking people, we need to, have more than that from some of our thinkers. especially atheist thinkers. I mean, I think we need maturity. I think we need, I'm waiting to see how they think that with all these variances, with people that like act all of a sudden on these impulses,
Yes.
which I guess people like Harris would say it was like determined from the minute that they committed this odd murder, let's say, was predetermined. I'm not sure about that. I think that we humans are terribly unpredictable, and I think that that's why things go so wrong in societies.
And you mentioned that we've evolved in towards more free will, it sounds
Yeah.
like. So what would the evolutionary biologists say about the utility of that? Would we be predisposed to survival if we had free will, or would we be more predisposed to determinism?
Free will, I think. I'm pretty sure. I
But
mean,
is
if
it-
you can make
Could
choices.
be destructive, that could be very
It
destructive.
could be
Or just
destructive to
blow you up.
It could blow you up, but I think, most people have enough genetic programming for survival that they're going to make, certain choices which are gonna lead to their survival. They're gonna outthink that animal because they have second and third and fourth order, desires. Remember, we quoted Dennett about that in our last lecture.
But you mentioned the dog example, but.
That's tricky. That was Frankfurt's example.
I have to disagree. I mean, what about dog training? Where you're
Yes.
training a dog to withhold his
Yeah,
impulse.
I think he's talking about like a normal dog, that it hasn't been trained. And sometimes, I do wanna say something else. I've noticed when I hear philosophers' lectures sometimes, and they're fairly contemporary lectures, that they say some very odd things, like kind of dismissing, animals' impulses and their thinking processes. So I'm not sure if I would take that too seriously.
Yeah, I don't, yeah.
Yeah, I agree. That's why I said, as far as we know now. Because but I have heard them say some fairly astonishingly silly things. And I'm just amazed. I'm thinking, what little philosophic cave have you been sitting in the last 40 or 50 years of animal research? It's kind of ignorant. I mean,
Yes. But there's still this tendency to say, well, we just have to understand the brain better, and we're just a bunch of neurons, and if we could only understand each neuron, then we'd be able to predict what behavior you're going to have.
Exactly. Now, are they right? It sounds like a fairy tale to me. What do you think?
No, I think you're right. I think one of the things you didn't mention is about the differences between macro and micro. That is, you might be able to make predictions about a society or a country, but you wouldn't be able to predict any one individual
In it, okay.
in it.
You can't even
Say-
predict that country.
Well, there's stereotypes about certain countries that say these people are passionate, or they're big artists, or they're big eaters, or whatever. But then on an individual basis, that would be contradictory, right?
Yeah.
So that's where I would say that on a micro level, there's this idea that you could determine
You can,
what
yeah.
somebody's going to do. I don't think that
I
that's
agree.
honest. But on a macro level, maybe you could, just looking statistically at behavior, or any one quality in human nature. I think maybe on a macro level, you could gather enough data points to then
Yeah.
make a prediction, but it's still just a probability.
Yeah,
It's not an absolute.
that's the thing.
But when we talk about determinism, I think that it's important to talk about the macro level and say we can only talk in terms of probability, not in terms of absolute.
Yeah,
I think it's important to separate that.
Well, that's a
instead
good
of saying
point.
that, because the same thing is true in economics, is that
Yeah.
they can't make predictions about what you are going to buy, but they can make predictions about what the whole country is going to buy.
but you notice that sometimes they're very wrong.
Sometimes they make
And the whole
terrible
thing
predictions
tanks.
that causes people to lose fortunes
You know?
by miscalling stuff.
Stay on the topic. If I have anything else. So, it's very, very interesting.
Oh, it's terrible. It's so interesting, it's terrible.
Yeah, it is, it is, and it's fascinating, I mean, of course, what I tried to do tonight was present some of the, better known thinkers, some of the more respected thinkers. There's a lot more, I mean, this is the tip of the iceberg. Sean Nichols does this wonderful job in his great courses class, and he takes it way back, and he also discusses the Eastern thinking too.
One weakness that I've seen in determinism is that it's simply not falsifiable.
That's exactly it.
So you can't really have a theory
No.
that's not falsifiable.
That's the point, nor is free will.
Free
Not
will is
really.
isn't free will
Not really, I don't
falsifiable?
see, how can it be,
Well, if, because it's the opposite of determinism, or
Yeah.
because, I'll have to think about that, I don't know.
We can't put either one to the test to see if it's false or true.
Because free
Empirical.
will is open-ended, is that
Yeah.
why you're saying that?
Yeah, empirically, this is a problem, you see, we argue and argue and argue and argue and argue, and we make these great pronouncements, and we say that we have proof, blah, blah, proof, especially the determinists are the worst, I think.
So, but
Proof
with,
of this.
but with free will, couldn't you interview someone and say, what did you intend to do? And they would say, well, I intended to do this, but I couldn't help myself, and I did that.
I don't think so, because you can see.
And they might be
that-
lying.
Yeah, they might be lying, or they don't know their unconscious decision, or you can see that these little milliseconds come in, and we don't know sometimes what we're going to do, but it seems as though we have a readiness, and we need that intent to take us over the edge to do or not do something. That's about all we can say at this point.
So you can't even rely on somebody's reports.
I don't think so, no, to me, reports are always the worst.
Okay.
That's why I hate those reports when they ask people whatever, this or that. And I'm going,
Well, I thought,
yeah,
that's
that's what a lot of the evolutionary psychologists do.
Mhm.
And I'm going, what does this have to do
therefore
with
my
Stone Age people?
ancestors from 10,000 years ago.
Yeah. Well, this
felt
seems to
this way.
correlate, and it's amazing to me that anybody's accepting it and how it's spread so rapidly and thoroughly throughout the society. But Jim and I are old enough to have seen a lot of silly ideas take hold, and
They
then,
come, they
and
go.
they come and they go, they come and they go, yeah. So I'm not really too impressed.
Mhm. What about nature versus nurture? Is this really just another form of the same debate of determinism and free will?
A little bit, not quite though, but it's
But
close.
nurture implies that there's this free will that says, I'm going to help children.
Well, not really, because nurturing says, that it's how you bring children up.
Yeah.
And then,
But you have it-
they'll go in the way that you're trying to get them to go if you treat them properly and nurture them properly.
Yeah.
Except for the 1 in 10 that does something quite different.
Differently than you nurtured them in, yeah. And the nature is then you can't create any difference because they are determined, they're, animals and they're unpredictable. Or their natures are violent and they wanna rape, kill, and, blah, blah, Yeah, so I think it's a little different. I think it's different. I think that nurture. And that again, that's another big discussion. And there again, there's no proof of either one. You notice there's a swing every couple of generations.
Mhm.
Right now, we're in the nature again.
Mhm, very much.
Yeah, and
But if
a couple
if
of generations, you're gonna get new people in the departments. They wanna get rid of the old guys who are retiring and what have you, and they wanna have their papers published. And they can't say the same old thing, so we'll swing back to nurture, wait and
Yeah,
see.
but if you don't
You'll see it,
intervene,
Jim and I probably won't live to see it,
if
but
you
you'll see it.
intervene
Remember I said
in
that.
nature, if you intervene with nature and with nurture, if you don't intervene with nature, with nurture, you're in trouble.
You have a lot of trouble. So there again, the middle road seems to be the most intelligent. And that's really, isn't that what societies do?
Yeah,
Yeah.
Don't they
Yeah.
nurture children in certain
Yeah.
ways to go?
yeah, as if it does make a difference, yes. Yeah.
In fact, that's what bothers me about Smilansky's position. He says that there's no free will, and then he says that morals and, ethics will go to hell. And yet if he believes everything's determined, why would it be any different? It seems to me that Peerboom and those guys, their position is more coherent, because they're saying it won't make any difference. He's saying everything's gonna go to hell, and yet I'm a hard determinist, huh?
But
Why would it go to hell then? You're assuming that people
They're
have some
already-
kind of will
they're
that
already
they're
taken
gonna
care of.
respond with.
But the modern Christian apologist would say, well, God is love, and that he lets his people come to him. He doesn't force himself on his people. So he lets them choose God rather than, forcing it one way or the other by predetermining it.
Yeah, but Theodore Drange and that's been one of the most cogent arguments against these theologians that come to this thing, because, if God wants us to come to him and be saved, as it were,
Yeah.
then why doesn't he give us some kind of indication? Why is he leaving all these people in the dark? Why is he leaving us atheists out
But
there?
that's a different topic,
But it's the same thing, really.
it's different than
isn't it?
saying, God has already decided that you're not going to come to him. That's not the modern Christian
No.
point of view.
No, it's very soft now.
Yeah. I wanted to mention Jewish opinions on this, and they too went both ways, even before Christ, is that there were they did believe in predestination among the Essenes, that God had already worked out everybody's plan of what they would be in life. Even the ones that were living in the community, who were supposedly be the most holy,
That's
he
interesting.
decided whether they were going to be good or evil, and then everyone else. But then there was just thinking here, the Sadducees, I believe, who wanted to have the choice, the free choice, and this is well before Christ, that we do have a choice in whether to be good or evil.
That I didn't know. I know that they didn't believe in immortality, most of them.
But again, it was a debate. There were these debates depending on what school of thought you came from.
Yeah.
But yes, they're ancient debates. And what else did I want to say about the Jews? So the modern interpretation is that there is this book of life that God will seal you in for another year. Every Yom Kippur, you're sealed into the book of life. If you're destined to have another year of life on the planet, you get sealed in the book of life. That is one of the prayers of Yom Kippur.
So how do you
that
know?
God
Just
seal
you seal me in and
When you atone for your sins, and he'll think about it.
oh, great.
He'll take it under
And if
consideration.
you get to the end of the year, hey, you made it.
And you go through the same thing all over again.
Oh, boy. Thank you.
Thank you, Mary.
This is a
Yes,
great
thank you, Mary,
discussion.
very
Thank
much,
you
and
guys
thank you.
for your great discussion.
Thank you,
your
Norm,
culture.
always tremendous notes.
Yeah, Norm is
My
great.